Well, honestly, this is not an easy thing, I guess, to talk about. It was probably one of the hardest things that we went through in life. I mean, when you see your son going through everything he went through with this viral meningitis, it was probably, I think, one of the scariest things we had to deal with as a parent, not knowing whether our son was going to come out of that hospital alive or not. It was just a scary time for us, and we didn't know what to expect. I mean, we have faith in God, and we trusted God, and we believed that God would touch him. But honestly, when down to it, and you're facing something like that of that magnitude, it can be a scary thing.
I was actually here at the church, and we had an event that evening, and I began to feel nauseous, and I began to get a really bad headache, and so I decided to leave here and go home. Throughout the next couple days, it got progressively worse, and I was vomiting, and I thought it was just a normal flu bug, but it got worse through the days, and so we went into the doctor, and they told me that I was then going to be going up to Columbus for further testing because they thought I had meningitis.
I had to go to work that next day, and you were taking him back to, they said to bring him back in, so we were going back into the doctor. And I remember getting the call from Donnie at work saying, hey, is there any way you can leave? We're heading to Children's Hospital right now. They think Jordan has meningitis. Headed up there and just started, we went to the ER, and they started some pretty rigorous testing, and
Did a spinal tap on in there, I think, if I remember right, in the ER.
That was traumatic.
They decided that they was going to keep him and do some further testing.
Yeah, they said that he would be there for a few days. And so we were just kind of going up, with that, and had a lot of people praying for him. A couple days after that, he was really, really not good.
I specifically remember one night where my headache was pounding so bad that I was literally I woke up and I was just pounding the hospital bed saying God, why is this happening to me? God, I need help. I can't take this anymore.
We kept saying, God, just help me. God, just help me. And we felt so helpless at that time.
When I first went to see him in person after he'd been in the hospital for a week or two, it really was an eye-opener. It was one of those things that I kind of underestimated and downplayed until I saw him, in person. And, we were made aware that things were getting pretty serious and pretty scary because he was, having multiple spinal taps, and they had a whole team trying to figure out what was going wrong with his body. And it was definitely scary because we kept, hearing things like he was never going to be able to walk again, or mentally he was never going to be the same. So I went in already, worried, but not as bad as when I left the hospital, because I walked into the hospital room and he just looked lifeless, man. He was a shade of white I've never seen. He lost every bit of 50, 40 pounds, something like that. He was skin and bones. He couldn't carry a conversation. He was too tired and too weak. He really couldn't move his head that much, and his arms were just kind of right here, laying on him. I went there with my friend Tyler, and we were hoping, us being there would kind of cheer him up, because if anyone could cheer him up in the world, it would be his best buds. But he really just wasn't feeling it. He was not himself at all.
We had neurosurgeons and kidney specialists and all kinds of people just rushing in. There was an eye doctor that had come in, and Jordan's intracranial pressure was increasing, and they needed to get it down. They said that his optic nerve was swelling, that he might be blind, he might not, he might go into a coma type state. And we're like, well, what do we need to do to fix this? And they said it's just something that we had to wait out and see. And that's one of the most painful things as a wait and see moment in a moment like that. And as a nurse, even so, I'm got a double whammy, mom and nurse. I want to fix it, and there was just nothing I could do at that point.
Yeah, so all we could do is just keep praying and trusting God, with the whole situation. I mean, we was calling people and having people pray for him all over the place, back here at home, really all over the nation. We had people praying for him to recover and to get out of the hospital. But it just seemed like everything just seemed to keep getting worse.
I've always been told that God does miracles, but it's so much harder to believe that He is a miracle worker when it's you. Especially when the doctors keep informing you that it's not looking any better, and it just keeps getting worse and worse, and you're on a downward trend. So keeping faith through this process was a very difficult thing. There was times that I didn't even know if I was going to walk out of that hospital room the same, let alone at all. And so it was a very challenging process for my faith to, here I am, my whole life I've been taught that we serve a God that does miracles, but here I am in need of a miracle, and it didn't seem to be happening at that moment.
It was hard, and I had to catch myself every time. I found myself doubting God and frustrated with God because I was getting angry. It was like, time was going on, nothing's getting better, and we're getting no answers at the very least, which I thought we deserved.
As the doctors were coming in and they talked about possibly moving him to a more critical floor. And I remember your dad at the time, which was our pastor, he had cancer at the time, and they really were recommending that he not come up because they didn't want to get him any kind of a bug or anything like that to get him sick. And he called us, and he was in tears, and he said, put me on speakerphone, and laid the phone next to Jordan. And you could hear him call out to God with such feeling and such earnesty, and you begin to feel the room shift at that point.
He had informed us that God woke him up in the middle of the night, and he was praying for me in the middle of the night, and it was then when God let him know that I was going to be okay and that things were going to take a turn. And that's really when things began to turn around for me.
It's like Steph said, you could feel a
You
shift,
could see
a turn
tears
in the
start to
atmosphere.
run down Jordan's face. He wasn't really talking or saying a whole lot other than just moaning and God help me, and you knew that those prayers were penetrating. So the next day was a Saturday, and if anybody knows Jordan, they know that he loves his Ohio State Buckeyes, and they were playing that day, and he was able to sit up and watch the game, obviously not with as much enthusiasm as he normally would, but we still considered that to be a huge step forward, only to be set back yet again. Things just started to go downhill the next day. It just seemed like it was this emotional roller coaster. We would get better, we would get worse, we'd get better, we'd get worse. That time they took him for the second spinal tap, and they just were not, they were like, the pressures keep climbing, we can't figure out how to get them down. Usually by now they've kind of, said within a period of 4 to 5 days, and I think we were on day 7 at that point, and they said usually the symptoms have pretty much started to wear themselves out at this point, and he was losing weight, he wouldn't eat, he wasn't with it, just barely, hardly awake at all.
They tried to get physical therapy in there too at one point, tried to get him up to walk around the hall, and he couldn't hardly walk. I mean, his whole body was trembling and shaking. He couldn't even hardly take a couple steps without, shaking.
They had a hold of him on a gait belt, and they were just kind of pretty much walking, and it had looked like he was either in a terrible accident or had like a stroke or something like that, because it was just like, this cannot be our son. Like, cannot be, this is so much different than how we came into this hospital. I remember they were talking about if he did not eat anymore, then they were going to take him down the next day for a feeding tube. At that point, that's when things really started to set in, like, oh my goodness, like, is this really happening, you know? I remember they had come to tell us that they were taking him downstairs at 5 o'clock that afternoon. And when they came, it was like probably about 3:30. I heard my phone ding, and he was still just out of it, comatose, just, you know, not with it. And my phone made a ding, and I looked down, and that was not unusual because we had a lot of people calling us and texting us and praying for us. The support was unreal during that time. But there was a young lady at our church, and she said, I just have to share this with you. She said, I was praying for Jordan today. It was crazy. She said it was like I had all these voices that were praying with me, but it was just me in the car. Like, my kids weren't even in the car. She said, I even pulled over to like look behind me to see what was going on. And she said it was just so crazy. It felt like we were at like a camp when everybody was holding hands and praying together. You could hear all those voices, but it was just her praying. And she said, I just wanted to let you know, I think it's going to be okay. Right before, it was about 4:30, Jordan sat up on the side of the bed. That was the first time that he had gotten up at all. Sat up on the side of the bed, and he said, what's for dinner? And we just broke at that point and just were like, we knew that God had given him a miracle. We did.
We began to see dramatic improvement. I was able to finally start eating again and keeping things down without vomiting. The headaches began to progressively go away. My fevers started to come down. It was an overall miracle, the way that things worked out and how quickly such a dramatic thing took such a dramatic turn.
All I know is God did a miracle, and things turned around there. And on that 15th day, we came home and celebrated.
I would definitely say that the situation helped grow my faith a lot because, it was one of those situations in my life where it didn't look good and it didn't look possible, and God showed me, all the reasons why He is God and why He can do the impossible. It was definitely a pivotal moment for my walk and my faith.
I felt very at peace and very thankful and grateful. Throughout this whole process, I was reminded of how precious life really is. And it was just a realization that, I could have died in that hospital. I could have left that hospital room dramatically different. And to see that I am the way that I am today with no complications, nothing out of the normal for me. It's really just truly a miracle that I thank God for. I was actually asked by a coworker a while back ago, we got on this discussion of miracles, and he asked me, why did God choose to heal you and not other people that are dealing with different things? And the only answer that I could think to give him was that God was not done with me. And I don't know why God chooses to heal certain people, and certainly I don't deserve the healing that I was given, but it's just truly an amazing story of how gracious and how good my God actually is. And it brings me great peace and great joy that He's not done with my story. I currently youth pastor at our church. We have been able to, through God's help, been able to build a thriving youth group ministry. Our kids are deepening their relationship with God, and it's truly amazing to see that part of that God still had purpose for me on this earth, and that those kids and those students are the reason why God healed me, because they needed a voice in today's world. They needed a voice that had spiritual influence in their life, and by God's grace, I have been that voice and been able to speak into their lives. And it's just truly an amazing story of how God's not done with me here on earth yet.